we're gonna start getting into a lot of the notable names that people go to church and hear about. So right here we're gonna talk about Abraham. Well, before he was Abraham, he was Abram, and before Sarah was Sarah, she was Sarai, I guess, Sai. And it's interesting to note that they start out in a place called Ur of Chaldea, and when we look there, when we look at Ur, when we look at the definition of the name, it means set on fire. And obviously, what we know from the previous chapters when we talk about fire, there's different implications to that. But on from there, they go to Canaan. And from Canaan, um, there's a famine or whatever. So there, God sends them down to Egypt. And once they kind of get to Egypt, Abram tells Sarai, look, you need to pretty much, like, I know we're husband and wife, but pretend to be my sister. So that way, when Pharaoh sees you, you're so banging that he's going to be all on that. And, if he sees if I'm your husband, he's gonna kill me off and just do the thing and just take you, and that just on some like gangster Al Capone stuff. And so pretty much she says okay. She goes along with the plan. And if you know the story, then Pharaoh, he gets these dreams or whatnot, and it's kind of revealed to him that yo, like that woman that you took as his wife, as your wife, that's not your wife, that's his. And then Pharaoh's like, "Oh God, my bad, bro. Like, I didn't even know, dude. Like, here, take your girl back, take some money and gold and trinkets and whatnot." And there's gonna be more on that. There's gonna be more on this a little bit later on. But as far as the story goes right now, um, it's kind of interesting to note because, well, even then, even when they get back to Canaan, she has to do this again with one of the Canaanite kings, and by this time she was like 100 or something like that, or you know how that goes. But I think it's interesting to note that he starts in Ur of Chaldea, land of Ham, right? Then he goes to Canaan, land of Ham, and then he goes to Egypt, land of Ham. I mean, what we're seeing is it's all black folks right now at this very time. And I know, well, the Canaanites, they're white. Well, we'll get to that, I think, next chapter. But at this point in time, it's all black, you know. And even then, what we know about the Egyptians and what we know about everything so far, it's safe to say that the Pharaoh was black. The Egyptians are black, the Pharaoh was black. And if you know anything about bloodlines, whether it's Egypt or whatever, you know that you're gonna want to preserve the bloodline, you know, and this is going to be important later on. So pretty much like there's a reason why when you look in England or whatever, there's not like, Prince William or whatever, and then like, Princess Rashida or something, right? I mean, there's a reason, right? Like you want to make sure that your heirs or your the next people coming after you or whatever look like you. You want to preserve the bloodline. Um, so with that being said, when we look at the Pharaoh, who's black, tall, smooth-skinned guy, apparently, well, we know he's black. I'm not sure about his stature or facial features or whatever, but we know he's a black guy, and we know that being a Pharaoh, he's gonna want to reserve his bloodline or whatever. So, he'll take, when he looks at Sarai, he sees her as pretty much wifey material. Now, that would mean that she would have to be black as well. If she was any other race, she'd probably be like a concubine or something along those other lines, but she wouldn't be fit to be a wife. And how this kind of relates to Abraham is like, look, if Pharaoh's black, he's looking for a black woman, black wife, and she's like, hey, this is my brother. If he could pass as her brother in multiple instances, then obviously he had to be black too. I think another interesting thing to note, not going to take that long to talk about, but if you notice, he wasn't really harassed. that whole time that he went from Ur to Canaan to Egypt or whatever like that. And probably part of that reason is because he blended in so well. Him and all the people that he's with, they just kind of blend in wherever they go. That's going to be important later on, but it's just something to kind of take note of. um, another thing to um, Another thing to note is after they left Egypt, that's when Abram became Abraham. That's when Sarai became Sarah. And when we look at Abraham, I'm gonna read it right now. Abram means high father, and Abraham means father of a multitude. But when you take that Ham part, Abraham, you can kind of how do I say it? You can kind of think of it as him being a father of a multitude of black skinned people. I mean, it's kind of weird how Ham is put right in the mix with everything else. The next section to talk about is Hagar and Ishmael. When we look at Abraham and Sarah, when they left Egypt, they took, along with money and gold and trinkets and stuff, they took servants with them. And one of the servants was Hagar. And if you know a little bit about the story, you know that Sarah was, she was kind of old, and at the time she wasn't able to produce children. So, they kind of took it upon themselves to, just kind of say, hey, well, here's Hagar, you have children through her, and, that'll just be the solution to the problem. And the kid that she had was Ishmael. And Ishmael is important because this is where pretty much the Arabs trace their lineage to. We look at a lot of Muslims or Arabs or whatever, and they see Ishmael as the progenitor of them instead of Isaac, who we'll get into later. But when we get into when it's kind of funny because when you think about it, we have Abraham, who's dark skinned person, and we have uh, Hagar, who is a woman from Egypt, with the land of the blacks, right? And they have obviously a dark kid. And then when we look at it a little deeper, when Ishmael gets married, he marries a woman from the land of his mother. So, here we see that at least, I don't know, maybe at least a good pretty much like I said, at this point, it's all black. I think in my book I say like 75% or whatever, but pretty much all the Arabs or whatever can trace their lineage right back to Africans, like a lot of the same people that they're oppressing, which is kind of crazy. The next section to cover would be Isaac and Rebecca. Not too much on this. Pretty much, it's on this section. I kind of just say that, since mom and dad was black, then kind of so are they, as well as their uncle Nahor. Man, I hope I said that name right. But along with that, something else that's kind of interesting is how they describe Rebecca as being beautiful, just like Sarah was, and um, when we look at the story of their life or whatever, it kind of reflects a little bit about Adam and Sarah's life, because Rebecca and Isaac also had to go into a land or whatever, and she also had to say that she was a sister instead of a wife, because of her beauty. So at this point, like I say, we're dealing with just black people, and uh, we're starting to see beautiful black women, which is important. There's going to be a lot more on this topic later, but I think a lot of the issues going on with our communities or whatever today is that, you know, at least as far as women are concerned, is that they're not seeing themselves in the narrative that was built for them, you know. And I just think I'll go into it a little bit deeper later, but just for now, this is just something that I just feel that it's important to point out. So the next section I want to go into is Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau are the sons of of Isaac and Rebekah. And when we look at them, it's important to note that even on their birth, the Bible has something to say about their appearance. Esau was born first, and the Bible goes out of its way to tell you that Esau was born, red and hairy. It pretty much, here's the first time that we see that it's, I'll say, mentioned that someone is born being anything other than what we would consider African or black. And then comes Jacob, who I guess he holds on to his heel. They call him like the heel grabber, or like the deceiver. He's like a trickster, a salesman, type person. But from Jacob, this is where we get, the tribe of Israel and Judah and all the other people and everything like that. But it's also important to note that, in this culture, in this time, it was the firstborn that gets the blessing. So it was actually Esau who was supposed to be the father of is, as far just by bloodline, right? In tradition, he was supposed to be the father of the Israelites or whatever, along those lines. But obviously, Jacob, being the trickster, tricked him, and he tricked him twice. And the first time he did it is what we're going to go over right now. Pretty much Esau was known as the hunter. He hunted, and, he brought the meat back, and he was well loved and everything like that. I mean, Pops loved him, right? He brought back the good meat and everything like that. It was pretty cool. Um, but here's the thing: one thing Jacob knew about him, and this is where he tricked him, because the story goes that Esau, was out all, he was out doing a long hunt or whatever. Pretty much comes back and he's just famished. He's tired. He's drained. He's just sapped. I mean, it's a wrap for him. And pretty much Jacob is, making this stew or making this soup or whatever. And Esau is like, hey, little bro, let me get some. And he's like, nah, I'm cool. He's like, come on, man, let me get some. Jacob's like, all right, I'll give you some of this if you give me your inheritance. And he's like, fine, screw it, man. So he, gives him the thing, and he gets the inheritance. But along these lines, what we can kind of see, um, how should I say it? When we look at the conditions of the region, it's a lot more problematic for, a light skinned, pretty much a white, hairy person to do what he has to do in this region than it is for a dark, smooth skinned person. I mean, it's no secret that the lighter you are and the more exposure to heat, the more it saps you, right? The more it bears in on you. And it also says that he was hairy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And heat, and obviously hair traps in heat. So, I mean, he might be a great hunter. I don't know exactly what happens on the hunts or whatever, but we do know that he would be prone to getting just exhausted during this time. And this might be the exact reason why Jacob was able to trick him, because he knew. He's like, well, I know he likes to go out and hunt, and he's all, light and hairy and stuff. I know he's gonna be tired, so let me just prepare this right when he comes back, and I'm gonna get what I need to get. The second thing that goes along with that, because like I said, he tricked him twice, and pretty much as um, as Isaac was dying, uh, you know, as Isaac was dying, Jacob wanted to get the blessing, I guess, again or whatever. So pretty much what happens is, Rebecca, pretty much as Rebecca, kind of sends Esau to go hunting or whatever, because I guess he wanted, like a last meal type thing. So what Rebecca did is she took like goat's hair and put it on his face and his body or whatever to make him seem hairy, because at this point in Isaac's life, um he was kind of blind, like he couldn't really see things, so he had to kind of feel. So Jacob goes in there and it's like, hey pops, I got you this food or whatever. Rebecca prepared she kind of helped, she helped Jacob deceive everybody, so she prepared the lamb or whatever for him. So they go in, he eats, oh my god, this is great, you done a good job, son. And feels on him, and when he feels on him, he feels the hair, and he knows, okay, well, this is the hairy son, so I know that this is Esau. And he says, you got the blessing, I bless you with everything, da 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 da, you got it, boom. And then Esau comes back and is like, hey, dad, I got the, and he's like, well, wait a minute, I already blessed you. You know, he's like, no, you didn't. I was hunting. He's like, well, who'd I bless? And so pretty much from here, we see that all through his life, Esau has been a hairy person, hairy, light skinned person, what we would consider albino. And in contrast to Jacob, who would be, the dark, smooth skinned, I mean, right? Because he had to get the goat hair put on him. He's the smooth skinned, dark, uh, person. The next section I want to go over is Jacob sees God. Now, obviously, at this point, Esau's pissed and he's looking for Jacob, and you know Jacob receives word that he's looking for him or whatever, so he kind of goes and um, he's, I guess, praying, he's doing his thing, and pretty much this is where he wrestles with a man. It turns out is God or whatever. He wrestles with the man for a whole night, and then the dude breaks his leg or whatever and leaves or whatever, and pretty much he wouldn't let the man go until he received the blessing from the man. And the man said, okay, well, I'm going to name you Israel. So this is where Jacob becomes Israel. I know I probably messed up that story. There's probably someone like, that's not the way I got. But for the sake of this thing, so the sun rises, and uh, Jacob changes, he calls the place that this happened, he calls it Penuel or Peniel. Now, this is important because, if you look in, like the Hindu religions or what have you, I mean, pretty much in any philosophy or whatever, you'll start to notice that they always talk about something called the third eye, and they always, they have the little dot or whatever right there that signifies the third eye. And I don't want to get too deep into all this stuff, but pretty much the there's a gland that it's pretty much responsible for secreting melanin or melatonin or whatever. And this gland, they say, is pretty much the gland that's responsible for making black people black, um, for regulating all that other good stuff. And oddly enough, that gland is known as the pineal gland or the penile gland. So right here, in the Bible, we're starting to see a lot of the similarities, even in, I'll say, biology or whatever. I know that there's probably someone out there that could explain this, especially as far as melanin and all this other good stuff is concerned. They could explain it a lot better than me. That's probably a research, a topic that should be independently researched. But as far as just for this little section right here, um, it's pretty important to note. The next section I want to go into is entitled Jacob's Women. This is where, we get into, his wives and, pretty much all the women that he had children with. And, he had two wives, Rachel and Leah. And if you know the story, then, going back to beautiful black women, what you call it? Rachel was one of them. You know, they describe her as having a lovely figure and a beautiful face. I think one translation says that she's, beautiful in all her ways. Like it was like she was just, just stunning. And then Leah was, I mean, she was. They pretty much describe her as being weak-eyed or tender-eyed. I don't know. Like, I guess she was like kind of beautiful, but had that one. It's like, why are you looking that way? Like, why are you? I can't. you know. But even then, as far as how she looked, we don't really know what weak-eyed really means. But as far as her figure goes, she was right on point. because if you know the story, then you know Jacob, um, he works for like 7 years or whatever to get Rachel's hand in marriage, but like a pimp, Nahor or whatever is like, hey, I know you worked 7 years for me, young blood. I know you worked 7 years for me. I know you wanted Rachel, but that's the younger sister. You see, we marry the older sister around here, so you got 7 years, uh, and you got Leah. So he works another 7 years to get Rachel. But it's interesting to note that when Jacob goes to Nahor, this is after they've already consummated the marriage. So they got married that night. They're in the tent. They doing their thing. He finally wakes up. He's like, "You're not Rachel. You're weak eye." But that's at the same time, they didn't have lights or whatever, so it's one of them things where you gotta kind of feel around to know what you're looking at. So I know I'm talking a little bit too much about bodies here, but I'm a man. What do you expect? um but along these lines, it was almost like an arms race with children with these two. Leah would have more kids, and then Rachel would have some or whatever. You can go through the whole thing, but at the end of the day, like 8 children from the tribe of Israel um, were born from these two women who we know to be of direct African descent, and the rest of the four come from two two other ladies, servants or whatever, known as Bilhah and Zilpah. Um, Obviously, we don't know for sure, but it's pretty much safe to assume that they were also of African descent as well. So from right here, we can kind of see from conception of Israel or whatever that we're seeing it's all black. It's all black folks. The next section I want to talk about is Joseph the Dreamer. Joseph is the guy who, had the dreams or whatever that, eventually his father and sons or whatever would bow down to him. They all laughed or whatever, and his brothers were kind of jealous of him because he was like the daddy's boy. His dad loved him. Like it was obviously one of like the favorite. So pretty much, on some messed up cold stuff, he's sold into slavery. Um, and Arabs, they kind of take him into like Egypt or whatever, he gets, excuse me, he gets sold to this guy named Potiphar, and Potiphar, um, has him as a servant or whatever, and his wife, thinks that Joseph is, just dreamy, and wants to be with him, but he's like, no, I can't do that. Potiphar's cool, that's my boy. I mean, I can't do that. And over time, she gets tired of it, and then she's like, hey, well, she goes on, she tries to come at him one more time, and he's like, I can't. So she's like, all right. She runs out, screams rape, and he's sent to jail or prison or whatever. And while in there, um, he starts interpreting dreams, and word kind of gets around that to Pharaoh, who has some dreams that no one else can interpret. None of his you know none of his people can interpret it. So they say, well, hey, we got this dude in prison who can do it. So he goes, interprets the dream, and everything seems right. So he kind of rises to prominence. He's given one of the he's given a daughter of one of the priests to marry. So he's getting in there. He's the second in command, and part of that dream was that a famine would come. So to pretty much store up all the grain and stuff, store up all the food. So along these lines, what we see is that the famine goes throughout the land. Everybody's coming to Egypt to get food or whatever, and that includes his brothers. And obviously, when he sees his brothers, he's like, "Wow, that's them." And he kind of toys with them for a little bit. I'm not gonna go into the whole thing. It's like 12 chapters about this dude in Genesis, so read along if you need to. But eventually, they find themselves in the same room, and they're at a banquet or whatever, and he's talking with them and everything, and he sends them away, and pretty much at the end of the day, he kind of reveals himself to his brothers, like, "Hey, it's me," and they're like, "Oh my God, we thought you were dead. We thought da 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 da." So he lets them come in, and they're all a part of the land, and all this other kind of good stuff. Now, what does this have to do with ethnicity or whatever? 'Cause that's what we're talking about. We're talking about blacks in the Bible. Now, first of all, let me preface this by saying I know that there's some people out there who's you're probably the Afrocentric type or whatever. You read the books. You know that about all about the Hyksos, and about what Dr. Ben and John Henry Clark and all these other people have to say, which I don't disagree with at all. You know, but as far as what we're talking about, as far as what the Bible itself would present and how it's all going to fit together, this is what I have to um, rationally give to you. Um, I think as far as the actual biblical story goes, maybe not the historical account, but the biblical story goes, Joseph would have to be he would have to be a black man. And here's the reason why. We all know that Egypt was black. It was a black civilization, longest running civilization in the history of the world as we know it, built by black people, ran by blacks, everything. Like it was cool. So we know at this time that Pharaoh's, at this time Pharaoh's black, most of the people are black. It's a black thing. And if the Israelites were anything but black, like if they were all whatever olive skinned or whatever, um, then so would Joseph. And if Joseph was, then when, his brothers or whatever came to see him, they'd see black, 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 olive skin. Okay, well that's you know. But pretty much when they got there, all they couldn't tell the difference between him and anybody else. They were in the same room. They were at the same table eating with this guy and still couldn't tell. So pretty much as far as they could see, it was just another, probably just another brother in charge, really. And that's, what I was able to get from it. And maybe a bit of vanity here, but the Bible describes Joseph as being pretty much handsome, well built. So to get a better picture of him, we can kind of see, a dark skin, pretty much a black guy, athletic, and one of them athletic black men or whatever. Just to kind of put a little bit more a little more context into how uh, he should be viewed. And something else, um, well, actually, you know what? Well, I'll get to that later. That kind of ties into something else. The next section I want to go into is the dreamer's family. Pretty much when we look at his wife, who's Egyptian, he has two kids, and I'm gonna try to, because I know I'm gonna murder these names, but Manasseh, Manasseh and Ephraim. So when we look at these two who are down the line, we're going to find that they also form a tribe of Israel. When we look at these guys, obviously, like, look, Joseph's black, she's black, they're going to be black too. So now we kind of see like the whole tribe, everybody's. But to put a stamp on it, we're going to get into the last section of the chapter, which is entitled Israelite Deathbed. Pretty much, when Jacob, or Israel, as his name was changed, when he dies, um, they feel it's important to, bury him. They go back to, Canaan, and, they want to, bury him there. And pretty much when they do that, they see pretty much, the Pharaoh sends everybody to go along too. He has so much respect for Joseph, uh, that he sent, pretty much what we're seeing is the tribe of Israel, and we're seeing Egypt or whatever. They're all going to this funeral, and the Canaanites. It's important to note what the Canaanites say about it. I'm just gonna um, pretty much they named the place where they buried him Abel Mizraim, which translates into mourning of the Egyptians. Um, you know, mourning of the Egyptians. So pretty much when they saw everybody kind of coming through and burying this guy, like they didn't see, some like light skinned people or this and that. Like they just saw Egyptians. And we know that the Egyptians were black. We know that Israelites were black. All they saw was just black people, and they were all dressed up in, pretty much the Egyptian garb or whatever. And we see that here in America. We see that everywhere. It's like when you go into a culture, you you end up over time, most likely wearing whatever the custom or whatever is of the day. So when the Israelites go into Egypt, they wear the same stuff. So if they wear the same stuff and they all look the same and it's all Egyptian stuff, that's why the Canaanites were like, well, that must be a bad day for the Egyptians. But there's going to be a lot more on this later. To go along with that point, people say that the Israelites, they were treated so bad or whatever, and we'll get into that a little bit later on when we talk about Moses and everything. But when we you know when we look at this, they were put in the best of the land. They were pretty much the best land that was perfectly suited for them to do everything they needed and wanted to do. They started out, everything was pretty good. So, even then, if everything's good, it's easy to assimilate. It's easier to, um, kind of adopt different cultural things and stuff like that. But I mean, there's so much stuff I want to just get into, but I can't, not yet, because there's a lot of other groundwork that needs to be laid. But as far as this is concerned, this chapter is done. We are going to go on to the next one, which is chapter 4, Moses on deck. And with that, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for